But to do that, he needs a united party, and it has been anything but in the last few days and hours. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, on Capitol Hill in Washington.
Well, Ross Feingold is a political risk analyst. He says House Republicans can now put pressure on the Biden administration, especially when it comes to foreign policy.
Well, certainly impacted in the sense that, again, there'll be a lot of oversight. At a minimum, there's going to be three things. There's going to be Afghanistan. So the House Republicans are going to investigate what happened in Afghanistan, the chaotic withdrawal. There'll probably be some very embarrassing revelations about decision-making or the lack of decision-making on the Biden team during those crucial weeks in August of 2021. Ukraine policy as well, but McCarthy is already famous for saying there won't be a blank check for Ukraine. So although a lot of that money was appropriated in the recently passed omnibus bill at the end of 2022, they're still going to conduct oversight and try to embarrass the Biden administration with too much being spent to buy supplies and things like that, cost overruns, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the big one, China. So the Republicans have already said they're going to set up a new committee. It will be bipartisan, but it's going to investigate all aspects of the Biden administration's China policy. And the result there, we know what that is. It's going to say that the Biden administration is way too soft on China, and they're going to call on the Biden administration to take a lot more action, whether that's on trade or human rights, sanctioning Chinese government officials. So we should certainly expect, versus the previous House controlled by the Democrats, a lot more talk about China and a lot of proposals and, frankly, a lot of criticism of the Biden administration.
McCarthy's victory came hours after a commemoration event to mark the second anniversary of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Democrats gathered on the steps of the building to pay tribute to the officers who kept them safe. They also reflected on the lives of 5 people who were killed during the attack. Supporters of Donald Trump stormed the Capitol 2 years ago. The former president had falsely claimed the 2020 election was stolen. Our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett has more from Washington, D.C.
To mark the 2-year anniversary of the January 6th riots, when supporters of former President Donald Trump sought to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, U.S. President Joe Biden on Friday awarded 12 people presidential medals, election workers as well as law enforcement officials, for their role in what he says was a courageous act, standing up for democracy, pushing back against those he says sought to prevent the peaceful transfer of power.
And it's not exaggeration to say America owes you all, I really mean that, a debt of gratitude, one we can never fully repay unless we live up to what you did.
More than 950 people have been arrested for their role in the January 6th riots, and among those, at least 350 have been convicted for a wide range of crimes, including trespassing and destruction of property. A House committee looking into the January 6th riots has also concluded that among those that should be charged, former President Donald Trump for his role in sparking the riots.
Orthodox Christians in Ukraine are celebrating Christmas under the shadow of Russia's war. Some gathered in Kiev's 1,000-year-old monastery. The service was held in the Ukrainian language for the first time. Ukraine officially split from the Russian Orthodox Church last year in a step towards establishing an independent church. 30 million Ukrainians identify as Orthodox Christians and celebrate Christmas on the 7th of January. And it's been a somber Christmas morning in Kiev. Charles Stratford reports.
Christmas morning for millions of Orthodox Christians around the world, but of course a Christmas here that has been blackened by more than 10 months of war. You join us outside this beautiful cathedral in Kiev. This is the most important Orthodox cathedral in the country, and today, for the first time, the head of the newly formed Ukrainian Orthodox Church will be holding prayers. Up until this year, those prayers had always been held by a Ukrainian Orthodox Church affiliated to Moscow. It is a church that certainly in recent months has been accused of having connections with the Kremlin. It has had its churches raided by the Ukrainian authorities, the Ukrainians accusing them of having links, of potentially being even linked to saboteurs inside Ukraine. Of course, this is something that is massively denied by that church that is linked to Moscow. But I think that that is a big reflection of just how this war has caused divisions between countries, but also between the religious communities inside Ukraine.
And this was the scene on Christmas Eve in the eastern Donbass region, where one church held mass in the basement. A ceasefire ordered by Russian President Vladimir Putin didn't stop soldiers on both sides from exchanging fire.
Over the past 24 hours, the enemy launched one missile attack and made 20 attacks from multiple rocket launch systems. The danger of air and missile strikes remains throughout Ukraine. The main efforts of the enemy are focused on attempts to completely capture the Donetsk region within the administrative border. It conducts offensive operations in the Bakhmut direction.
And in Russia, President Vladimir Putin attended Christmas Mass in a cathedral on the grounds of the Kremlin. Senior government officials also took part. Moscow imposed a 36-hour ceasefire following calls from the influential head of Russia's Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill. Meanwhile, the United States has confirmed another military aid package for Ukraine worth $3 billion. It includes 50 infantry fighting vehicles which can fire anti-tank missiles that were used in both the Gulf and Iraq wars.
It'll take a couple of months, basically, to get this capability fielded, to get the Ukrainians trained. That new training program that we're starting, it's roughly a battalion's worth of forces at a time, so roughly 500 soldiers over the course of roughly a month, and we're adding on the Bradley training.
In other news, calm has returned to the Mexican city of Culiacan after a day of violence. Authorities say 29 people were killed when members of the powerful Sinaloa cartel confronted security forces. The government has deployed an additional 1,000 troops to the city. The violence broke out when police arrested a drug kingpin on Thursday. Ovidio Guzman is the son of imprisoned drug lord El Chapo and an important figure in the Sinaloa cartel.
There is still no security. No one is telling us everything will be fine. It still doesn't feel good.
We walk around in fear, waiting for God to save us and that nothing else happens.
I go out afraid that they will stop us again. I work here at the supermarket.
John Holman reports from Mexico City, where the government released more details about the arrest.
They said that everything's calm now in Culiacan, in Sinaloa. That's the state in northern Mexico where this all happened. And they revealed a little bit more information about the operation. So the key thing about this is that it's the second time round they've tried to do this. In 2019, they went in for the same man, Ovidio Guzman. He's the son of Joaquin Guzman, otherwise known as El Chapo, probably Mexico's most famous drug trafficker ever. They went in to get him in 2019. They did get him. They had him there in the city. And then there was such a battle, and so many Sinaloa cartel operatives went out on the streets in vehicles, shooting things, burning things, putting up road blockades and things like that, that they had to let him go. The president was worried about loss of life and civilians being affected. It was a real humiliation for him. So this time round, they got their man 3 years later. He said that things were calm. He was saying the differences between the two operations. For example, last time round they tried to get Ovidio Guzman about midday. This time round they went in the very early morning. Last time round it was right in Culiacan, the city which is a real center point for the Sinaloa cartel, and this time round they went to a sort of village on the outskirts of Culiacan to do it, which made things easier.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera. Extreme weather hits parts of Australia, forcing authorities to deliver aid via helicopter. France's former leader is facing a corruption trial. We'll explore what that means for the country's politics.
Hello there. We'll look to East Asia, and China's seen lots of clear and calm weather over the past few days, but things are going to change. We're going to see some wetter weather working its way into the south, but still for Beijing and Shanghai, temperatures above the average, lots of sunshine and clear skies here. Now it starts to clear up across the Korean peninsula as that wintry weather sweeps out once again into Japan. We're expecting some snow flurries to fall from Hokkaido down to western areas of Honshu, but Tokyo manages to recover that temperature to double digits. Now it's going to get wetter in the south of China as an area of low pressure moves its way north across the South China Sea, bringing some heavy force to the likes of Hainan Island, and Hong Kong is set to see that wet weather through to Tuesday. Now as we move to South Asia, it's been relatively dry across much of the areas here. We are likely to see some wetter and windier weather, however, sweep in from Afghanistan, dropping temperatures here. It'll do the same across parts of Pakistan. It is going to get a little bit warmer, however, across areas such as New Delhi, but the fog remains an issue in places like Uttar Pradesh, stretching all the way to Bangladesh. Much clearer further south of this, the heavier rain, however, can be found in Sri Lanka, and we are looking at a bit of a wet and wintry prospect for Pakistan on Sunday.
The American people have spoken, but what exactly did they say? Is the world looking for a whole new order with less America in it? Is the woke agenda on the decline in America? How much do social media companies know about you, and how easy is it to manipulate you?
The critical look at U.S. politics, the bottom line. Undercover reporting. Exclusive stories, explosive results. Al Jazeera investigations.
You're watching Al Jazeera. A reminder of our top stories this hour. Republican Kevin McCarthy has been elected Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives after 5 days of political stalemate. McCarthy's bid was blocked by hardline Republicans who repeatedly voted against him. Ukrainians are celebrating Orthodox Christmas under the shadow of war. Fighting's continuing on the front lines despite a ceasefire called by Russian President Vladimir Putin. At least 29 people have been killed in violence in Mexico following the arrest of drug cartel leader Ovidio Guzman on Thursday. Gunmen and military police were engaged in intense fighting in the streets of Culiacan. Now, the Horn of Africa and East Africa is in the grips of a crippling drought. Several consecutive harvests have failed, and aid agencies are warning that millions of people could face starvation. Catherine Soy reports from Turkana in eastern Kenya.
This is a familiar sight in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Hundreds of families are heading to the capital from areas across the country. They are fleeing a drought that has wiped out their livestock and left them without food and water. Some of their children have died. Many are malnourished. Amina Mohammed recently arrived at this camp. She is struggling to make ends meet.
When I wake up in the morning, I make tea and popcorn. This will be my children's only meal.
The last 2 years have been hard on people in countries like Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia. 4 rainy seasons have failed. It's likely the 5th season won't make much of a difference. Across East Africa, at least 36 million people are affected, including children who are severely malnourished. 11 million Ethiopians and 4 million Kenyans are close to starvation. More than 8 million Somalis have nothing to eat. Millions of farm animals have died, and 16 million people cannot get enough water.
We not only affected the farming, but the situation is still critical. That has also affected the food production.